I need to explain the istiqra again. And we said that, let me ask you a question before I answer that question. What were the declaratory laws that we've discussed thus far? 7, okay. Which means what? The cause, right? Or give me more definition of it, though. What's the definition we use for it? The what? No, that's different. Huh? No, that's just when we talk about the difference between using 7 and 9. What's the definition of for cause in general? Okay, I wrote it down the board right over here. Somebody must have wrote it down. Yeah? If there's an apparent fixed quality, right? That, which affirms the judgment. Okay. Right, like the brother mentioned, like the declining of the sun has linked the law of, or the entering of the prayer of time. And the second one he said was mana, which was meant what? Impediment, and it was a definition was prevents the judgment. But if it's not there, it does not necessarily mean that the judgment's there. Okay, the third one was shart, okay, which was condition or stipulation, which meant right. Okay, but what was it? Okay, what happens if it's present? Does it mean that? Right. Right, because there might be other ashraf, there must be other conditions and situations of these. Okay, so these 3 laws, sabbath and mana and shart, we said that in order to affirm any of them, you must have an evidence from the Qur'an or the Sunnah. In other words, one cannot say that something is a sabbath of something, or something is a mana of something, or something is a shart of something, unless there's an evidence to indicate that from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And then when you want to know all, the plural of the word sabab is asbab in Arabic. The plural of mana is mawana. The plural of shart is ashraf. Or no, actually shuruf in this case would be correct. Plural. Shuruf. So if you want to know the totality of the asbab of some aspect like prayer or marriage, if you want to know all the muwada, all the shuruf, right? You have to do a process which is known as istiqra. And to answer the brother's question, istiqra meant that you would make a review of all the texts of the Qur'an and the Sunnah pertaining to that topic which you're trying to find the asbab or the muwada or the shuruf for. And then what did we decide last time? The process of deduction or induction? Deduction. Then deduction, the process of deduction, you'll be able to enumerate all of these asbab and muwada and shuruf for. So istiqra is the process of going through the text and enumerating that. Yes? Well, by then he would be able to, after he's done istiqra, he can then make judgment. I mean, this process proceeds, let us not forget that the istiqra regarding the asbab and the mawana and the shuruf of the actual worship and the contract between human interaction has already been done by the scholars, right? And so one can refer to the various legal textbooks of fiqh, and he will find them listed. Now, the scholars, as I mentioned, differ depending upon the evidences they use and so forth regarding these matters, or the validity of specific evidences. But, I mean, in terms of the asbab and the muwana and the shuruf, I mean, they've already been done because this is something which was necessary for the, essence of the Islamic religion. Okay, we're going to continue now with our discussion of these laws, and the next one which we're going to discuss is something which is known as sahih, which might be, let's write in Arabic, which might be translated as valid. Let's let me write the definition for it in English. We're going to have two definitions for sahih. Before I do that, in general, right? If this is the Sharia, we can divide the Sharia into two major branches. Okay, acts of worship, which are known as the ibadat, and interactions between human beings, which are known as mu'amalat. Okay? The ibadat, in general, are 6 major categories. Purification, which is known as tahara, salah, zakat, the fast or sawm, the hajj, right, the pilgrimage, right, and also umrah enters into that, and jihad. These are the 6 major categories for the acts of worship. Purification, tahara, right, which includes wudu, it includes the ghusl, okay, and everything dealing with that. It includes the regulations dealing with the woman and her menses and the different types of natural bleedings that occurs in her, like whether after birth or due to menses or so forth. It includes with the chisal of the fitra, like growing the beard and trimming the mustache and clipping one's nails. This is all part of purification. Okay, salah, the various prayers that we do, the 5 obligatory prayers. Moreover, the recommended prayers, that whether done in congregation or done individually. Zakat, the obligatory zakat, also the other forms of charity that are given. Okay, the fast, right? So in part of that would be i'tikaf, the staying in seclusion, the masjid during the last 10 days of Ramadan. Hajj would also include the acts of umrah and everything related with that, like the slaughtering. Okay. That one does at the end of Hajj, and also other slaughterings which, even though are not part of Hajj, are sort of put in this chapter because it's too similar, like the aqiqah. Okay, which even though it's not part of Hajj, but since the regulations dealing with the slaughter of Hajj are similar, also the aqiqah, the slaughter which is done for a newborn child, it's usually discussed in the book of Hajj and Jihad. These are basically what we call the ibadat. These are general categories. Underneath, of course, are many different acts of worship. The interactions between human beings, or the mu'amalat, are what was known as buyur, which is buying and selling. And under this category, there's a whole number of transactions of different types of dealings of buying and selling that can be done. Okay. Likewise, inheritance and bequest, and all the regulations pertaining to that, endowment, which is known as waqf. Fourthly, marriage and divorce, and all the issues dealing with that. These are all fall under the topic of the mu'amalat, or interactions between human beings. Okay? So when we talk now about sahih as a 4th declaratory law, which we translated as valid, we will provide 2 definitions. One definition with regards to that act of worship when it's considered sahih or valid, and another definition regarding the mu'amalat, that interaction between human beings when it's sahih or valid. Okay? Now, so how do we define sahih with regards to acts of worship? Well, that act of worship which is sahih is one which is an act of worship which is sahih or valid, is one where the act of worship is in agreement with the Sharia by completing its shurut and arkan. And by having no mawani'. Okay, so an act of worship which is described as sahih or valid is one where that act of worship is in agreement with the Sharia in that all the shurut, all the stipulations for that act of worship have been completed. All the arkan, which I'll explain in a second what that means, have been completed, and there exists none of these impediments, these mawani'. All right? The essential, in any act of worship, there are certain matters which are essential to that act of worship. If they are not done in that act of worship is considered invalid. Okay, among which is, for instance, ruku' in the prayer. If you, for instance, said Allahu Akbar, placed your hands on your chest, recited a Fatiha, recited a surah, and then made sajda without making ruku'. We're not doing a verse that has a sajda in it, okay? It's just saying if you don't want to do ruku', that prayer would not count. That rak'ah would not count, okay? Because ruku' is an essential act within the prayer. Likewise, standing up from ruku', right, is an essential act in the prayer. To prostrate is an essential act of the prayer. To sit, the final sitting before the prayer ends is an essential act. To say Assalamu alaikum is an essential act of the prayer. The initial takbir, the initial Allahu Akbar is an essential act of the prayer. These are called individually rukun, okay, which means pillar, right, and in plural, arkan. Okay? So, what we're saying over here in our definition of sahih, that it's an act of worship which is described as valid or sahih, is one where the act of worship is in agreement with the Sharia by completing its shurut and arkan and by having no mawani'. Yes. Oh, which word? Oh, I'm sorry. Spelling it or? I know my handwriting is atrocious. I'm sorry about that. Shurut. I guess we're spelling it like that. Okay. Arkan and mawani'. So an act of worship, we said, is described as sahih or valid when that act of worship is in agreement with the Sharia, which in this sense means you've completed all the shurut, all the conditions, stipulations for that act of worship, and all the arkan, which are the essential aspects of that act of worship, and no impediment is there. Okay, no mawani'. Mawani' is plural of what word? Mani'. Okay. So let's think about it now, okay? Somebody does salah. He does not make wudu. He does his salah according to the Prophet's prayer, and there's no mawani'. Is his salah valid? Huh? No, right? Because he didn't do all the shurut. Okay? Somebody does all the shurut before prayer. He faces the qibla. He does salah. He does wudu. And the time is in, and so forth. His body is covered, but he doesn't make sajda. No, okay. So that's the idea. Right. Now, what is the effect regarding that? Yes? Yeah, we're going to get to that next. In the next session, we're going to discuss when something is not sahih, how do we describe it? And we'll come to that shortly. Now, when a person does an act which is sahih, an act of worship which is now described as sahih, what results from it in regard of he fulfilled the obligation. Remember, we said that what did we say that the Sharia law was? It was, the divine address. So he's fulfilled that address to him. Okay? He's completed that demand. However, though, another issue remains is that is it accepted by Allah? No, right. That's the answer. In other words, just because something wordly is valid, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's been accepted by Allah. Okay. At the same time, it does mean, though, that he will not have incurred any sin for that act by not doing it, because he's fulfilled, right, outward requirements. But whether that act then is accepted by Allah, and we receive a reward for it on the Day of Judgment, is another matter unto itself. Okay, so we talked about sahih with regards to acts of worship. Now let's talk about sahih with regards to the mu'amalat, or the interaction between human beings. And basically, the definition is similar, but we say a contract which is sahih is one which is one. Let me write it down here. A contract is sahih when it is not in disagreement with the Sharia due to a shart or rukun missing, or a mana being present. Okay? So, interactions between human beings are contracts. The word contract, usually when you say in the English language contract, what comes to the mind is a written document, right? But in the Sharia sense, an act, which we are translating here as contract, does not necessitate that it's actually written, all right? But rather, when you buy something, if I go to you in the store and I give you £1, right, and you give me a soda, then how much a soda cost? I don't know. 50 cents, okay. I give you 50 cents, right? And you give me a soda back, right? That's a contract in the Sharia. Huh? What's a soda? I don't know. I don't know what you'll call a pop or something like that? Or one of those things, that glass over there, okay? That bottle. Fizzy drink, okay. And so for a fizzy drink, then that's a contract. You know, we don't actually have to sit there and write it down, okay? And when you marry a lady, okay, you don't necessarily have to write the marriage, and it has to be registered in order to be valid according to Sharia, even though, of course, with something important like marriage, you usually write it down. And likewise, when you buy something of importance, like a house, it's usually written down. But the point is that a contract doesn't necessarily have to be something written. It can be a verbal agreement. So a contract, in the interaction between human beings, is sahih, valid, when it is not in disagreement with the Sharia due to a shart or rukun being missing, or a manner being present. Is that clear? Okay. So, a man wants to marry a woman and they do not have permission of her guardian, is the marriage sahih? Marriage contract. Depends. Why would it depend? Huh? Speak up. When it depends, you should have an answer, right? Okay, let's say she's a virgin. Just you don't get the issue if she's a non-virgin. Huh? No, I mean, if she's a virgin, she needs her guardian's approval, right? Even if she's an adult.
What is reasons are against Sharia?
No, that's not what's talking. The point is that the approval of the guardian, right? The existence of the guardian is a condition for marriage, right? I mean, the conditions for marriage, for a valid marriage, are what? That both the spouse and the groom, right, are present, and they know each other. They are both accepting that there is a guardian. Okay, that there are two witnesses, and that there is a dower or a mahar. And these are basically the essential conditions for a marriage, right? Exactly what? No, it doesn't be a parent. I mean, it can be to our closest male relative, and if there's no male relative, then it would be the sultan or the person in charge of community in a non-Islamic setting. So we want to understand, we're not talking about the fiqh of marriage, we want to understand the issue of sahih and contract. So, there are no two witnesses to the marriage, okay? Taking out this rukun, okay? So they have the spouse and the groom, and they like each other, and everybody's the guardian's there, they put a dower, but there are no two witnesses. Is this contract valid? No. Why? Because one of the conditions, or the arkan in this case, rukun, is missing. Okay, let us say she is in her iddah. Alright, she just got divorced, and it's just the first month of divorce, and so they have the spouse and the groom, and they're both pleased, there's no coercion, they both choose to marry one another. The guardian is there, the two witnesses are there, and there's a dower. Is the marriage valid? Because of the existence of a man at present. Yes, there's a question.
It has to be, I think you know what I'm going to say if I mention that has to be already. With regards to the issue of wali,
yeah, they don't require it, and we'll discuss that when we come to the issue of facet and involvement.
That according to this criterion.
Right, absolutely. Because if we were now, if the person who was going to judge the marriage contract, right, felt that the evidences, right, did not necessitate a guardian, then he would judge the marriage contract to be valid in that case. But the point is, it's not what the madhab says, but it's where the evidences of the Sharia lie.
What does that state does that leave those people in who have gone through the millions of marriages all over the world?
No, I mean the question is, I mean, if the marriage is they thought it was from the Sharia and they knew nothing other than that, then the marriage is still valid. I mean, the children are not born out of wedlock and they're not in sinfulness or so forth. But what we're talking now is that just in general, a judge or a mufti, right, it's incumbent upon him to give a judgment according to Allah's law and not according to a legal school. Now, we'll discuss this in the last lecture, Usool or defending the last lecture. However, though, if his, he can use these legal schools as guidelines, all right, to help him determine what Allah's judgment is, but he still has to seek Allah's judgment no matter. Yes? That doesn't be a four kind of marriage. The shurut of marriage is, not really. There's not really any shurut per se of marriage. They're basically just outside of marriage. This is what the Hanbali method or the other way around, excuse me. There's no really outside of marriage. These are all shurut for the four shurut for marriage, according to the Hanbali method. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me see if we can fix one. Yeah, there's a fifth stipulation, which is the acceptance. Okay. Which refers to the offer and the acceptance, which is known as ijab al-qabul. When you offer, the guardian offers his daughter and the groom accepts, or the groom proposes and the guardian accepts. So the five essential ingredients. Now, one of the issues about the arkan of the shurut is that usually the distinction is that if this is an act okay, an act of worship or a contract, the shuruf exists outside of that, and the arkan exists within that. So sometimes something might be considered as a shart or a rukun, just depending upon the way you look at it, like the niyyah for salah. I mean, does the niyyah, the intention, right, is it a shart, is it a condition, a stipulation for salah, or is it a rukun for salah? Well, it depends on how you look at it, because the intention sort of comes with the salah. So you can look at it just being before the salah, and so therefore you would count it as a shart. Or you can look at it as being part of the salah itself, and so therefore it would be considered as a rukun. So there's some flexibility in counting the way you count them. It's just important to know them, and where they fall. These are just conventions by the scholars and are just used to assist in learning, but are not necessarily fixed matters. Okay, let us now, if we understand sahih, let us now look at its opposite, which is fasid and batil. Maybe I didn't mention about sahih regarding contracts. When a contract is sahih, right? When a contract is described as sahih, what is the effect of that? Well, the effect is that that contract is now enforced. The contract is enforced. So one can then enjoy all that that contract entails, okay, from rights and privileges. So for marriage, when the marriage contract is considered sahih, it's enforced, and so therefore the partners, right, in marriage, right, can engage in sexual relations without being in sin. When a contract of buying and selling is regarded as sahih, as valid, then you can now enjoy that property which you have purchased and dispose of it, right, and use it as you wish. So the effect of a contract being described as sahih is that the privileges that come from that contract are now in effect. Okay? Well, if we understand sahih, it should be easy to understand the fifth declaratory law, and that is fasid, okay, which is really the opposite of sahih. If something is fasid or batil, these are two terms which most scholars use interchangeably. And you can, in terms of acts of worship, or contracts, it refers to any act of worship or contract where a shart or rukun is missing, or a mana is present. So a person is not upon tahara, he does salah, he does not do wudu, that prayer is considered to be fasid or batil. Right? A person buys something, but in that buying, it's bought with deception, gharar, okay? Then therefore that buying, okay, that contract of buying is considered fasid or batil because it has a mana, an impediment. So I come to you and I say, okay, I'm going to sell you this house for the number of grains of sand on the earth. That is considered a contract which is fasid, right? Because the price is not stated. Okay. And so therefore one of the essential conditions for a contract to be correct is that the price must be known. Or I say, well, I'm going to do anything to me, okay, I'm going to buy for you, come to my pond, and you say, I'm going to buy I'm going to buy from you one of your fish. So I say, okay, whatever fish in the sea. Which fish did you buy in that lake? I'm telling you, you don't know, okay? Or I tell you, for instance, I say, okay, see those birds flying in the sky? You can have whatever goose you want for 10 pounds. Also, one of the conditions that you possess the items you're selling is not there. So this is an example. Let's call fasid or batil. Now, as I mentioned, the majority of the scholars use the terms fasid and batil interchangeably, okay? Except for the Hanafi scholars who make a distinction between the two. And some other scholars make a distinction when it comes to the subject of marriage, whereby which a marriage where all the ummah is in agreement to its invalidity, they call that batil. And where some of the ummah are not in agreement, they call that fasid. So, when it comes to marriage without a guardian, okay, they would call that contract a fasid contract, because there are some scholars who have said that the presence of a guardian is not a condition, right? It's not one of the arkan of zawaj, all right? However, though, if a person, let's say a Muslim woman, married a Christian man, they would all be in agreement, right? They would call that contract batil, because there's no disagreement amongst the Muslims that that marriage is invalid. Any questions? Okay. As I said before, when we discussed, like, for instance, the different, like the use of fard and wajib, the different terms for mandub, the different, like illa and sabab, batil and fasid, these are just conventions used by the scholars to describe different realities. And there is no harm in using different terms as long as we understand the meaning of these terms. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an, or the Prophet ﷺ, did not come to us with a list of terms saying use this term for this matter and this term for this matter, but came to us with realities, okay? That some acts are obligatory, and you want to call them fard, you want to call them wajib, okay? But the obligations are different. People understand that. You want to give the different degrees of obligation different names, that's fine. Okay, there are certain acts that are recommended. You want to give different names to the different degrees of the recommended act, that's fine. But, I mean, the general understanding is there between all the scholars. There's no difference. But the naming of different aspects of it, these are just terms of convention. And as long as a person understands what is the terms being used, then there's no harm. The problem comes when somebody doesn't understand what the terms are being used, or he knows certain terms because he was taught in a certain legal school, right? And then he's trying to apply those terms across the board, and, he ends up misunderstanding the writing or the pronouncements, the verdicts, legal verdicts of scholars. Before we close the topic of the declaratory laws, we want to mention a couple of things. There's just two more points I want to bring up about that. As we can see, we took these 5 declaratory laws, which were the sabab, right, and the illah, the shart, the mani', sahih, and fasid, right? And we can see that the Sharia, in these declarations, links matters to these causes. It doesn't link it to the wisdom behind matters. So this is a principle that we should write down. That the Sharia links regulations to declarations, which would enter into here, of course, right, the sabab, the shab, the mana, and not the wisdom or wisdoms behind that. And to give an example, let's take the example of qisas again, right? Qisas is required when murder occurs, okay? One of the wisdoms behind qisas is that in qisas, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us in the Qur'an, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, that in the qisas there is life of men who have understanding, okay? How is there life in the qisas? In the sense that it prevents murder. It's a deterrent, okay? And likewise, it prevents retaliation, especially in tribal societies, where the idea of one's group is important. So you kill somebody of my tribe, right? Then I go out and kill somebody of your tribe, irrespective of that individual who killed the person of my tribe. That results in another retaliation and so forth, okay? Now, so therefore, Allah, the wisdom, one of the wisdoms behind the qisas is that it preserves life, okay? Let us say that you are in a situation where the qisas is not acting as a deterrent. It's not acting as a deterrent, for one reason or the other, okay? So one of the wisdoms behind the qisas, right, which is deterrent, is not being achieved. Does that mean that therefore we stop the application of the qisas? No, because the Sharia links regulations to the declaration and not to the wisdom. So even if that wisdom is not achieved, for whatever reason, but the cause, okay, is there, the regulation must be fulfilled.
Yeah, but no, I mean, Allah was clearly showing us that wisdom would be achieved anyway.
But I mean, look, we can think of sometimes let's say, imagine that, for example, that, I mean, yes, in a society it would be achieved, but sometimes, let's say that, for instance, people live in a small village, all right, and so therefore the idea of an execution, a qisas done in that village, doesn't result in that sort of public thing like when you do it in a big habitation. There are millions of people there, and so the message gets clear to them, okay? The people who live, they live way out there, some sort of mountainous area, away from, major, areas of human habitation. Does that one execution affect the majority of the people? No, because they might not even know about it. But still, it has to be applied because the cause for it was there. Yes?
And other hudud have to be done. When they're done, is it that it's incumbent upon the Muslim community to actually go and witness it as well, yeah?
Yeah, any of the hudud have to be done publicly. Except for...
people actually, sorry to cut you,
yes.
People are called, would the Muslims actually believe certain countries do it on Yom al-Jum'ah? Is it actually, you would be requested to come, or they do it in a way such as the people would view it?
Yeah, that's some of the people, as the message gets out there. I mean, it doesn't have to be like forced attendance or something like that. With the exception of those hudud which I don't want to get into the topic of slavery, so I'm just going to mention this, where the master can apply upon his slave. And that doesn't have to be done in public. Like whipping your slave for committing zina. In this case, you don't have to do that in public. Okay. All right, we have the last section concerning declaratory law. Is we have 5 terms, which we just want to give the definition. They don't deal with declaration, but there's really no other good place to stick them in Usool itself. So this is about the best place to talk about them. Yes. Yeah, as long as that's classified. So what are these 5 terms? Well, I'll just look at them. The first one is azima, and number 2, rukhsa. They are 2 descriptions which describe an act of worship, an azima is that regulation or judgment or law when done without considering any excuse. And the rukhsa is the regulation or the law or the judgment when done, when taking into consideration an excuse. So the azima is like for salah, it's like when you do your prayer fully. Alright? When you pray your normal prayers fully, like in the masjid, right? 4 rak'ahs for dhuhr. That's described as an azima. When you fast the month of Ramadan, the day during Ramadan, that's considered an azima. When you do not eat carrion, maita, that's considered an azima. That's how the act, the regulation is to be applied without considering excuse. A rukhsa, or a license, is the regulation when done when taking into consideration excuse. So you're traveling and your prayer is shortened from 4 rak'ahs to 2. You're fasting, so you break your fast because you're traveling or because you're ill. You are faced with starvation and dying, so you can eat carrion or flesh of swan. Question? No, okay. And so therefore, that's how we describe the acts. Either they are, as they are normally, they're from the azaim, or they're an azima, but when the sharia lessens the act, for one reason or the other, it becomes a rukhsa. And these rukhsas are 3 categories. Okay? Either they are wajib, or they are mandub, or they are mubah. For instance, or they are makruh. Some scholars add a 4th category, makruh. A wajib, a license which is wajib, is to eat carrion when facing death. Maita. Something which has died naturally, some sort of animal. We haven't slaughtered it. Okay? So if you're facing death, right, from starvation, okay? Death from starvation, right? And the only way to prevent that is by eating some animal which you have found, dead, that was not slaughtered, which normally would be haram. This rukhsa is wajib to do. Because preservation of life is required in the Sharia. Alright? Something which is mandub is like to shorten one's prayers or to break the fast when traveling. It's not required to take this rukhsa, this license when you're traveling. If you want to pray dhuhr 4 rak'ahs, asr 4 rak'ahs, isha 4 rak'ahs, that's fine. If you want to continue the fast, it's fine. But it is preferred, right? It's mandub to adopt the rukhsa. The third example would be the ariya sale. The ariya sale is the sale of dry dates for fresh dates on the trees, on the palm trees. This is a type of riba under most circumstances. But the Prophet ﷺ permitted this exchange when the people are in need of fresh dates, okay, so long as it's less than 5 awsaq. Awsaq is the plural of waqt, which is a type of measurement used at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. All we have to know now is just that this is a type of riba sale, okay, that is permitted under some circumstances of need. So here, this rukhsa is mubah, okay? And finally, a makruh rukhsa, for those scholars who see rukhsas also fall into makruh. Not all scholars see that. That to gather between the prayers due to a hardship. You're sitting for an examination. I don't know if you have let's say a qualifying examination that's going to last 4 or 5 hours, okay? And the examination is such where you will not be able to leave the examination room in order to do asr prayer, okay? And by the time the examination is over, long examinations 5 hour, 6 hour examination, Maghrib would have come in. So the Sharia permits us at times of need to join our prayers. And so therefore, you pray after you pray your luha, you also pray your asr prayer. Okay? The scholars would consider this a rukhsa, which is makruh, disliked. There's no sinfulness involved, but it's something disliked. Yes?
How is it considered makruh if the Prophet did it without, when he was traveling and when he was traveling to the Islam? He did it to make it.
Most scholars, not most scholars, there's a group of scholars that I mentioned earlier, it's not most, there's a group of scholars who understand that the rukhsa is only in these 3 categories. Okay? The wajib, the mandub, and the mubah. There's some scholars who also see it extending to the makruh, and they give this as an example. One of the problems when teaching a subject like Usool al-Fiqh is that you're faced with 2 choices. I could teach Usool al-Fiqh according to a madhab, right? And then the benefits might be restricted only according to that legal school, okay? Or you could try to teach it in a general manner, okay, that sort of cuts across all the legal schools and provides the general principles, okay? And that's what I decided to do for this course. I took a textbook, which is written as an introductory textbook in Usool al-Fiqh by a modern author, who tries to write a textbook that's sort of independent of all the schools, to take the basic issues. Sometimes there are some issues which are, not necessarily fit in these categories according to a school of thought. Or it might be based upon his ijtihad in the matter, what his preferences in the matter as the author of the book, which might not be the strongest opinion. Yes?
The last point you were talking about, someone saying initially those 3 stand out, but the fourth one.
No, I'm not standing out. That there is sometimes, okay, that some regulations, right, take into consideration an excuse, a license given by the Sharia is something which is certain, right? Now, when we look at all the regulations in the Sharia, okay, which have taken into consideration an excuse, okay, we can then divide them into categories, okay, depending upon are you required to adopt that license, that rukhsa? Okay, sometimes you're required to adopt it, so it's wajib. Sometimes it's preferable for you to adopt it. Sometimes the issue is optional, right? And according to some scholars, sometimes it's disliked to adopt it, even though the Sharia allows it. While other scholars say just by the mere fact that the Sharia has permitted something, then therefore it can never be disliked. That's another argument, they say. Yeah, then they would drop the 4th one, for that group of scholars. How much time do we have in this class? Huh? Okay, so we have, okay, it's actually 15. So let's take some questions, maybe 1 or 2 questions for a minute or so, and then, yes, brother.
About sending proof to the case. I want that to part of we have regarding something. And in terms of regarding advance, let's say you give me £1,000, all the things that we go with you. Now, if they are maybe you can do nothing.
Yeah, that type of trade is not permitted in that sense to to sell, because the Prophet forbade the selling of the fruits before they have become ripe, mature and so forth. So to sell something which is not even appeared yet, is not, unless you're selling the tree, then that's something different, Yeah.
Many years of history.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Muslims have tried to find as many loopholes as they can and try to make money. But what this type of sale is that when people are in need, especially you might imagine this happens in the Prophet in Medina, sometimes people were in need of fresh dates, and they only had dry dates. So normally to exchange dry dates for fresh dates is a type of riba, but the Prophet allowed it when it's less than 5 awsaq. This is what can be used for consumption, or for using animals, to feed your animals and so forth. Yes. What about the stock exchange? That's a topic that needs a lot of. We'll leave that for some other time. Getting the contract from who's giving you the. But who's the one who's issuing that? Is it a Muslim or a non-Muslim? Who's the one who's issuing that? It's a contract that you've entered now in between you and the. Like for instance, when I came to the United Kingdom, and they stamped in my passport an entry thing. That's some sort of contract that I've now engaged in as an individual with this country. Okay.
So if they then break the contract, assumption that they are working fairly and
well, if there are some sort of assumptions to the contract which they do not uphold, then they've broken the contract. Yes.
I'm just curious. You said in the example of the mandu that it was permissible to eat what is on the forbidden to sustain life because it works for sustaining life. How does this apply to the scholars in certain countries who realize that their life is at stake when they are requested to give certain fatwa, and they give fatwa to basically make the safe themselves?
One of the stipulations for commanding good and forbidding evil is that one does not have to command good or forbid evil if it brings harm to himself. At the same time, one cannot speak or agree to evil unless it is under the threat of death. So here, if the threat of death is true, he has an excuse before Allah. If that's the best course of action for a scholar to take, or it's martyrdom, better course of action for him to take, I think I would return to him as to, obviously to stay steadfast, and even if it results in a martyrdom, is something which is obviously more worthy before Allah, but it's not something which is required. Yes?
One question has to do with when Muslims trade, when it comes to Muslims trading with non-Muslim partners, is there any rules in the Sharia where you know that the person you're going to trade with will support oppressing the Muslims or support undermining Islam, that this transaction becomes illegal, even if it's on halal, commodities? Does that make it invalid to trade with certain people if that they're going to use these? You've got clear proof that they're using the trade, the money from the transaction in other areas to undermine the Muslims, like oil. Well,
it depends. Like I didn't hear.
No, it doesn't matter. We don't need to be specific. We just need to.
It depends on how clear that matter is.
Well, the pipeline in Algeria, the gas pipeline.
In general, if a Muslim cannot engage in a contract, the general rule is that a Muslim cannot engage in a contract if he knows that it's going to result in some sort of greater harm. Okay, and I'll give you an example which the scholars of fiqh mention in their books of fiqh. Selling arms during time of civil strife is forbidden in the Sharia. Why? Because you know the people are in some sort of civil strife, and you're going to sell an arm, okay, which you know that will be used in all likelihood to take innocent lives, it becomes forbidden. Even though the contract, might fulfill all the conditions, right? Might have no riba inside, there might be no impediment. So outwardly, it is valid, okay? But and then therefore comes that. Now, for something specific like a pipeline or something like that, this would determine now for a scholar who possesses the ability to exercise ijtihad to then look at this and determine is this linkage truly there, and based upon that, he can give a ruling. But the principle there is the Sharia, I guess.
Yes, in a country where Muslims and non-Muslims are fighting, they are calling it a civil war, as in war. Do you think we can compare this?
When I meant a civil strife, I meant in terms of when the Sharia refers to a civil strife about fitness, when two Muslims put the sword to each other. When the Muslims were in Bosnia, I mean, maybe according to international law, that's considered a civil war because when two parties fight in some sort of territorial, common territorial jurisdiction, that's a civil war. That's according to international law, but we're in a class on Usool stuff. So. Yeah. Is the Qur'an ijtihad? Okay, ijtihad will come in the future, but just to, istiqra is when you are trying to enumerate, right, those different conditions and impediments and causes. Ijtihad is when a scholar exercises his opinion in order to find Allah's judgment in a matter where neither there is a text from the Qur'an or a text from the Sunnah. Like, for instance, video cameras. There's nothing in the Qur'an and the Sunnah regarding video cameras. A scholar would exercise his ijtihad to see what is the Sharia ruling regarding a video camera. Is it halal or is it haram? For example. Or like a certain type of sale or trade which did not exist in the Prophet, like stock markets.
What's the ruling?
Huh?
What's the ruling on video cameras?
Video cameras, different opinion. Some see it as like the mirror, and therefore lawful, and some see it falling under the Prophet's prohibition for making images. Okay. I think we need to take a break. Is that all right?